So today we're going over day one's challenge. This is the supply and demand theory. This is the session we're going to be breaking down the foundational steps to making more milk. Now, for today's session, what we're going to be covering is a brief supply and demand overview. Now, you may have heard of supply and demand, but let's also be honest and say that there's a different perspective when it comes to looking at it from a low milk supply angle. In fact, we're going to be then going over how this exactly really more translates into a low milk supply angle, or if you're struggling to produce enough milk. Then after that, we will be going over the best practices required to see change in your supply using this theory. And then we will be kind of redefining expectations and results and what you can kind of expect when you are trying to implement this into your milk supply and milk production strategies. So if you're not familiar with supply and demand, really briefly, breastfeeding is basically based off of this theory called supply and demand. And I say theory. It is not a law. Okay. And the reason that is the case is because while, yes, we have the biological dynamics that would be in play here, where there's just that, that demand from your baby, and then there's the supply that is produced, it doesn't always work out when there are other factors that are inhibiting or kind of coming into the picture and can cause problems for your milk supply. So this is kind of one of those where it's like, it works. It does. Don't get me wrong. But we have to take it with a grain of salt and also look at more than just the supply and demand theory and take in all the other factors that are possibly contributing to any supply issues. So, supply and demand, brief overview. Your breasts are a signal to release milk. This is basically when your baby would latch on and begin to suckle at your breast. And that is when your body will signal oxytocin to let a letdown happen. Okay. From there, your baby will be nursing, and that is when the demand is initiated. That is when it's receiving the signal like, okay, my body needs to up the production. There needs to be more milk to replace what's being removed right now. And that is what we are aiming for when your baby's breastfeeding. Okay. We then jump into the fact that your breasts have now been emptied and they are at a place where they are ready to have milk production kick back into gear. Last but not least, milk production is stimulated and your supply is initiated. So this is where your breasts begin to refill and get ready for the next feed. And so it's a cycle, but it doesn't always work this perfectly. And if anybody here who, I've heard people tell me like, Victoria, I am demanding all day long. But let me tell you, the supply isn't there. You are not alone. I was in the same boat. So here is the low milk supply version. Let me know if you relate. You are demanding all day long. And if anything, your supply is just barely creeping up. And so this is what can be really frustrating when we hear this supply and demand rule. And really it's demand and supply. It's the order it happens in. But when we hear this, we're like, okay, what am I doing wrong? Like, why is this happening to me? Right. And so this can have a variety of reasons. There's so many variables, but I just want you to know that there are moms who are doing all of the right things. You are doing all of the right things despite, all of your efforts. And it's just sometimes you may need some additional help. Okay. Things that can come into play here. There can be things such as your hormones, right? There could be anatomy, oral ties, bad breastfeeding advice and misinformation you received. There can even be tension from your little one, and that can cause them to have a hard time with nursing. There are certain things that sometimes you could even eat that can both help or hinder your supply, and even things that occur during your pregnancy, labor, and delivery. And so these are all things that you want to take with a grain of salt, because it's one of those where there are certain things that are more within your control, and there are certain things that are much more challenging to control. And it doesn't mean that you have done anything wrong, but we also don't want to just be trying everything and anything. Because let me tell you, when I went through my low milk supply, I was doing the anything and everything strategy for the first about 8 weeks until I found a lactation consultant who actually was able to help me. She was incredible. She was my 4th lactation consultant though, right? It took 4 for me to find somebody who was actually able to be knowledgeable in low milk supply, which is why I am teaching what I'm teaching, because I've learned so much along my journey and this whole process. And I just could not find enough information or resources or people who knew enough about low milk supply. So what I was doing in the beginning was just blindly taking any bit of advice and just, praying for a miracle that my supply would just kick into gear. And let me tell you right now, you don't want to be shooting an arrow in the dark. You're not going to have much success if you're just blindly shooting. So what I would say from here is you want to do more of a strategy like this. I don't know about you, but I want to be able to shoot an arrow in the dark with a spotlight right where I'm going for. So that is essentially what the goal is here, is to kind of break down why low milk supply happens, understand why you may be experiencing what you're experiencing, and then from there have a more tactical strategy around trying to support and increase a milk supply. Because otherwise you're just going to drive yourself crazy doing this whole thing over and over and not getting the results. And talk about being discouraging. We want breastfeeding to be a positive experience regardless of the outcome of your supply. And so this is something that can be achieved, but it is something that you want to do in a smart manner. So let's dive into a little bit more of these things that could be inhibiting your supply and why that kind of can be important to address earlier on than later if possible. So this is, imagine a tree, right? This tree is doing well and all, but one day you start noticing there's a branch that is having some sign of disease. You could cut off the branch and you're like, the tree will be fine. The rest of it's healthy. It's all good. Except that branch continues to, or the tree continues to get sicker and sicker in various spots. The problem is not the tree. The problem is the roots. There's something at the root that is causing the tree to get sick. That is the same thing when there is any type of interference with our body. There is always a root cause behind the biological disruption that's occurring. So our bodies are designed to be able to produce milk. And if it's not able to do so, there is always something behind that. Now it's just a matter of putting on your detective hat and trying to figure that out. And I don't expect anybody to do this on their own. In fact, I don't encourage you to. Definitely seek the help of professionals and certain medical experts. But this is essentially why this can become a problem for moms who are trying to increase their milk supply and aren't seeing any results. The root problem at hand is not being addressed and it's not being resolved. So what we want to do is anytime we are facing a milk supply issue, we do want to make sure first and foremost, we have the breastfeeding basics in place. Okay. And this is just because you will not see results if you do not have these things foundationally there first, and then we can tackle the root cause if it's beyond that and you're not seeing any results. So this is where supply and demand comes into play, right? You start with the breastfeeding basics. If you are implementing these, supply and demand will take its course if there is nothing else inhibiting it. Okay, so 8 to 12 milk removals a day. I personally say aim for every 2 to 2.5 hours. I know 2 to 3 is pretty common, but I find that life gets in the way. If you're going for every 3 hours and you are doing that in a 24-hour window, you're only getting 8 feeds a day. So you're just barely hitting the minimum. We do want to try and make sure, this is especially more in the first 12 weeks postpartum when your supply is being established. This is what your goal is to do. So I say aim for 2 to 2.5 hours because you might have a kid, an older kid that you have to take care of, or you might be in the middle of sleeping at night and you have your feeds just go a little too far apart because you overslept past your alarm or your baby didn't wake to feed. And so all these little things throughout the day can just kind of catch you in a place where you may not be able to get in your 8 to 12 milk removals a day. So I say aim for every 2 to 2.5 hours. That'll put you more in the 9 to 12 milk removals per day. And that is, ideal if that is going to help you make sure you're getting enough removed out of your body throughout the day. Okay. We want to also encourage baby to be feeding a lot and on demand, feeding on cue, but also there's times that we got to kind of help and prompt your little one along. Okay. The other thing is we want to make sure your breasts are fully emptied. Emptying your breasts can be done in, more than one way. You can just exclusively breastfeed. And that would be great if your baby's able to efficiently nurse, but sometimes not all babies can. There can be, like I said, oral ties and tension and all kinds of things that can play into your baby not being able to feed efficiently. And so sometimes pumping may be an added way to make sure that all your milk is fully removed, and that you're able to make sure that at each feed your breasts are fully emptied and your body is able to receive that signaling to try and up its production for the next feed. Okay, the next thing would be make sure you are fueling your body appropriately. You would be surprised how much nutrient deficiencies can also play a role into low milk supply. So nutrient deficiencies, not getting enough water, all of those things, can be really important and critical. Protein is an example of a nutrient that is absolutely required for milk production to be, as optimal as can be. And there's a few other minerals and vitamins as well. So fueling your body with healthy foods, lots of water, and you don't have to overdo it on the water. Just drink to thirst. People ask all the time, is like, how much is too much or too little? Do what works for you. Listen to your body. It knows what it's doing. Okay. And then rest and skin to skin for you, because this is a lot. This is a lot. I am 2.5 years in from my journey at this point, but I do remember being there, and I went through the same thing. So make sure you're taking rest and have time to do skin to skin to try and help promote all of the hormones that will help with your milk supply, milk production. But really, this is the main pieces you need to be implementing for supply and demand to work. Now, say you're doing all this, supply and demand is still not working. Back to those root causes, okay? That's what we want to dive into next. But first, I do want to just outline some expectations. If you are implementing all of these, you're like, what kind of time frame can I expect to see this supply and demand kick into gear? Really, you can expect to see results in about 3 to 5 days, and upwards of 7 days before you can see the results. That can be up on the higher end, but this varies based off of every mom. But again, if this is like the time frame you are really doing all of those best practices and putting them into place, then you're not doing anything wrong. It's not you, all right? That you should be seeing these results, and there should be some sort of, indicator that your supply has increased. And if not, again, back to those root causes. Okay. So I personally want to share that I didn't learn this in the very beginning, as early as I wish I had. Your supply will at one point hit what's called regulation. Your milk supply will regulate somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks postpartum. Now, people always freak out and say, can I not make any milk after 6 to 12 weeks? No, that's not the case. And it's not that you can't increase your supply either, but it does become a lot harder. Okay. It is like the first 6 to 12 weeks, your postpartum hormones are working in your favor. It's like helping you push up a rock uphill. All right. And then after your supply regulates, you can increase your supply, but it's usually a lot slower. Progression wise, your hormones aren't helping push it up. It really falls back on the supply and demand factor rather than the initial postpartum hormone surge that happens that allows your body to really try to up its production in the early stage, that 4th trimester postpartum. So, and like I said, 6 to 12 weeks is what the rough time frame is, but every person is different. And so you really want to make sure you are capitalizing on those 6 to 12 weeks, if that is still the time frame you are in, to try and get the most momentum going. And so putting those best practices into place and figuring out that root cause is literally essential in order to try and get the most progress very early on. So again, I don't want to be discouraging to anybody who's past that window, but it is important to note that it just can take more time, and it can be a little bit more challenging to get that needle to move. So let's talk about next how to address anything outside of you're doing all the right things. What are the next steps? So here, step 1, you want to check in with your baby's latch, their oral function, and other external factors, because I'm not here to say supply and demand is the only answer and the only thing you got to be doing. These things need to be assessed as well. Okay, so check in with your baby and all of the external factors that are applied to breastfeeding. And we'll go more into those over the course of the rest of the sessions up here. But we want to also then check in with you and check your medical history and your body, and just make sure that you know that if you are not seeing results with just your typical breastfeeding best practices, these are the things that are at play that are holding you back from getting the results that you're wanting. Okay. And I don't want you to fall into that trap of shooting that arrow blindly in the dark. This is definitely the definition of insanity, right? You're doing the same thing over and over. You're breastfeeding day in, day out. You are expecting to see some sort of result, but you aren't getting there. And, you're just, it's going to become this vicious cycle. And so I don't want anybody to fall into this trap. This is not ideal. Mental health wise, it's not ideal for you, for your baby. Breastfeeding should be, even if you have a lower supply, it still can be enjoyable. And I'm still breastfeeding 2.5 years in. I want this to be, an example to moms who are struggling, that it doesn't have to end just because you don't get to your goals. Because I know here everyone's goal is to exclusively breastfeed, and I want that to be the case for you too. But there are times where, you try as you might, there might be certain factors that are challenging to achieve that. And I'm not saying that, it's the end all be all. It's definitely something that can be discouraging for moms. And so you got this. If you are still on this journey, you should be very proud of yourself, because this is hard. So tomorrow we are going to be going over the next session, where I'm going to be breaking down the 3 different methods to encourage milk production. So this is going to be all around different techniques and strategies. I am so excited that we are going to be, helping you learn, have your body signal to up your production, and you'll be able to feed with ease, save your time, save your sanity, all the good things. If you are currently watching this on YouTube, then you can go on over to moveyourmilkchallenge.com and sign up. We are still only on day 1 of the challenge right now. And I'm going to turn over to my people here on the live, and we're going to be doing some Q&A.